Buenas tardes. Bienvenidos todos a esta.
Good afternoon and welcome all to this event. It is really difficult to get to Gran Via, so thank you very much for the effort you've made to come here for us as organizers. It is difficult, it is chaos, and from the association at the On Chaos organization, it has been a challenge to combine blockchain with art. We've made the greatest effort possible to bring you the best professionals about this topic in order to shed light on such a complex topic. And first of all, I would like to thank the venue, Fundación Telefónica, which has offered to house this event, and also to Colección Solo, which is an organization without whose support it would have been impossible to organize this event. In the specific case, if you see the logos on Chaos, for example, in the networking part of this session, there's going to be a cocktail for us to have a drink and discuss a little bit, if you like. And we really focus on promoting art through the use of new media, and it made sense to support such an event. And without further ado, I will introduce Anna O'Connell, who is the president and founder of the other association, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about blockchain.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Anna O'Connell. I am the president of ARA, and I'm co-organizer of this event together with Oscar. I would like to welcome our speakers here today, Norbert Norton, Nicholas Isto, and Jonas Lund, who have come from New York, London, and Berlin. In the past years, the blockchain has moved from being a technological niche to becoming something that we have around us on a daily basis. We talk about blockchain as a digital revolution, for instance, in the real estate sector, insurance, or music, but also in the artistic world. This afternoon, we are lucky to have with three experts who will tell us about the different uses of blockchain in the world of the arts. Our speakers will tell you, will speak for 20 minutes each of them, and after their lectures you can ask them questions as well. Robert Norton from Verisart is our first speaker. He is the founder and CEO of Verisart, and this is one of the main companies in the blockchain and art field. He's also the co-founder of Saatchi Art and Sedition Art, and he will tell us about how artists, collectors, and galleries can use blockchain in order to confirm the authenticity of a work of art. So welcome to Madrid, Robert, and I will leave the floor to you now. Thank you very much.
Sí. Gracias. Lo siento, no hablo mucho español.
I don't speak much Spanish.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction and to be here with Ada tonight. I'm going to explain in the next 20 minutes a little bit about how I came to blockchain technology, and give you a brief overview of what it is, and then explain how we use it at Verisart to help artists and galleries with regards to digital certification needs. So about 10 years ago, I became the CEO of Saatchi Online, which is a large e-commerce platform to sell works directly over the internet, mainly by unrepresented artists. Those artists didn't have a specific need for certification, but in my next business, Sedition Art, we distributed art in digital format, and we actually created certification in-house so that when a person bought a digital artwork, they were given a certificate that allowed them to access it on our platform. And one of the artists that we worked with, an MIT graduate, Casey Reese, wrote to me in 2014. He said, "Hey, Robert, you should look at this thing called blockchain." And I was like, "What? Bitcoin? Does he need money? What is this?" And I started looking into it. And so I'll give you a very kind of brief blockchain in 60 seconds. So on one level, it's at this point, it's as much a narrative discourse that either unites and divides people, but the technology itself is what enables Bitcoin, which is a virtual currency, to operate. And its distinguishing features that it's both a database and a network, that the network is a distributed ledger, and that means when it's an append-only data structure, so when you add something to the ledger, you can't delete it or erase it. It's distributed, meaning that it can be shared across many computers, and it lends and builds itself on the back of applied cryptography. Hopefully that hasn't lost you entirely. I'll talk a little bit about why I think it's relevant for the art market. So in the art market, trust is paramount. And at a time of a transaction, there are two things that matter. One is what I am selling what I'm saying it is? Is it real? Is it authentic? And secondly, do I have the authority to enter into this transaction? And to date, the trust component is often taken at one person's face value. And the resulting problem of that is that we see large fraudulent activity in the art market. The FBI estimates that about 10% of the entire art market every year results in fraudulent activity. And unlike other businesses where that fraudulent behavior is often theft, in the art market it's typically forgery and unauthorized reproductions. And so you can pick up the newspapers almost any month of any year and find some element of disputed provenance or a disputed sale. And I think one of the reasons for this is that the way that we talk about objects hasn't really changed, changed from bits of paper that are issued and we're expected to take on face value. In some ways, I think of it like stock certificates before there was electronic database for these stock certificates. Pieces of paper that people told you represented something, but you couldn't actually verify it real time. So the impact this has, and particularly the market that I focus on, which is online transactions, is that it's basically depressed the amount of activity that I think we could otherwise see through e-commerce marketplaces. So overall percentage share of e-commerce online through all art is less than half what we're actually seeing in terms of fraudulent activity. So the art market itself, of course, requires privacy, it requires information silos, and we kind of come from a very opaque world. But most technology is increasingly kind of transparent, so we see kind of great advances with price databases, and we see advances with image recognition, and the advances with image search and social image kind of posting. And why I think blockchain has got a specific relevance to the way that we think about certification, provenance, and registry moving forward is that it is at its heart both a technology that is anonymous through the secured use of cryptographic keys, but also transparent in the sense of one can go back and look at what was said when. So at Verisart, we really combine three things. We combine classification standards. We use something called CDOC, which hopefully some of you here might be familiar with. It's an ontology for classifying cultural objects. And then we use the Bitcoin blockchain for making the registry of these statements, and then we take an image hash of every image, which allows us to identify an artwork based on the image hashes that are in our database, and we work with a company called ArtRendex to do that. When we look at the status quo, we're dealing with effectively pieces of paper that are perishable, easily forged, unable to verify in real time, and also content limited. And effectively what we're doing at Verisart is we're taking the different information silos of certificate, provenance, and registry and kind of collapsing it all together in a way that can't be separated. So here's an example of one of the first artists that we worked with in a significant manner, Shepard Fairey, who's a well-known American contemporary artist that practice involves a lot of limited edition prints and street art, and also kind of collectible art that's sold through galleries and exhibited in museums. And this is one of Shepard Fairey's certificates on Verisard. And I'm going to sort of zoom in a little bit to some distinguishing features about this certificate that isn't otherwise available in his certificates beforehand. So the first thing is, you see at the top this timestamp. So this is a time that isn't coming from our own database, it's coming from the Bitcoin blockchain, and it's reflective of this blockchain address. So if you were to click on this PDF, you could open up this blockchain address and you would see this timestamp attached to the block address. And then we have something here, which is a string of data. We call it current owner, but it's also referred to as a public key. And this key, which is attached to the owner's record, or in this case the artist's record, is used consistently every time a work is updated. So we have kind of three different things that we didn't have before on the old paper certificate. We have a public key that's used to encrypt the data. We have an address and a timestamp where that hash of the data is stored. And then we also have a URL, a place where you can go and see the information that is related to those commitments. We started in 2015 with a mobile app aimed at artists, and we gave it to them for free to try out, give us some feedback. And unfortunately, we found out that many artists just don't really like to catalog their works. So we started to open up our platform to partners. And the first partners that we worked with were e-commerce sites that were selling limited edition prints. And this is an example of Avant Arte, who are a European seller of artist prints. And so what they do on their website is they actually treat the blockchain certification as a value add that the artist is getting. So that the collector is getting. So they're proud of being able to offer not only beautiful works that people want to buy, great framing, but also good certification. And why that certification is important is that from a collector point of view, they've got now a nice record that they can print out if they wish, or they can store in a digital folder. But it's a way of preserving their value and preserving their ownership. And of course, because it's a digital record, there are things that it can do that pieces of paper can't do. So it can potentially solicit inquiries if the person was willing to make that record public. So these are some of the things that an evidentiary infrastructure can enable, different types of applications that are not evident in the paper world. Then we worked with the online auction house Paddle 8. So again, they were looking to move forward with the times and to support the demands of their new online collectors, which increasingly is requiring better standards of certification. So again, the certification gives collectors, it's a post-sale service, and it also allows them to preserve their value in a more meaningful manner. And so with Paddle 8, they actually use our API, so they integrate data with us at a large scale, and all the post-auction sales records are now blockchain certificates handled through us. We also worked earlier this year with DAX, which is the leading artist rights organization in Europe. They represent about I think it's 30 or 40,000 artists, and they handle artist resale rights. And this was an initiative that actually came from one of their artists, which was a guy called Maurice Bilk, and he was a sculptor. And he said, there isn't any standards for bronze foundries in the UK. There are sort of association for silversmiths and goldsmiths, but there isn't anything for bronze foundries. So he and DAX decided that they would create something called Bronze Chain, which was using a very simple old technology, which was a physical tag that is given to the foundries to stamp their bronze sculptures. and that's coupled with a blockchain record. And I'll talk a little bit more about this gap between the digital certificate and the physical work, and how different companies are closing that gap in order to create more verifiable claims of authenticity. This is a system which is one of the largest inventory management providers in the US. It's called Art Systems. They were one of the first. They reach about 2,300 galleries and 800 artist studios. And we are in the process of integrating with Art Systems, so that when you actually have your existing inventory management platform, you're not having to do any data duplication or any data re-entry. You'll be able to literally go print my certificate and pass the data and print that certificate under your own gallery, customized look and feel, branded certificate. This is probably the recent deal that we did in the summer that I'm most proud of. We were the first company in the world to work, first blockchain company in the world to work with eBay at any level, and they trialed us in their arts and collectibles category. And we did it with the artist Ai Weiwei for a sale of 3,000 editions of his work to support the Public Art Fund for World Refugee Day on June the 20th. And they had worked previously with Ai Weiwei, and they had had issues where people were basically copying the editions that had been sold, and within 24 hours there were appearing fake copies on the eBay platform. So eBay really wanted to show to represented artists that it would take the problem of unauthorized reproductions more seriously and use technology. And so what they did is every single sale had its own unique certificate, and then eBay emailed directly the user to claim their certificates. And we had a 78% uptake in the number of people that claimed those certificates, which was very, very high, much higher than eBay had initially kind of forecast. And I think what that showed is that the people out there, the actual collectors, they have quite a strong understanding of the benefits of digital certification, and also they weren't confused about blockchain. I was concerned that we had to staff up more customer service people to handle the eBay launch, but in the end we actually only had 2 customer service inquiries, and bizarrely enough they were both the same thing, which is how do I print my certificate, which is a kind of funny full circle endpoint from building a digital certification system and then people actually just wanting to their paper records. So you can't underestimate what the current practices are. This is one of the eBay certificates of Ai Weiwei. So in this case, Weiwei chose to use this sign as his signature. And once he's using the Verisart system, that prevents anybody else from using that name or those public keys and creating certificates as a certificate of authenticity by him. So in the last few minutes, I'm going to... Oh, this is another well-known artwork that was sold in the last month. The artists, Obvious, registered their work through our platform as well. This was the work that broke the record for a AI-generated artwork at auction. Our partner program, which is really aimed at companies that have some engineering resources and can are looking to integrate data with us on a large set, provides a bunch of kind of custom fields and quarterly reporting and development resources and a dashboard that people can use. But to kind of drill deeper ahead of my next the next presentation by Nicholas, you know, one of the things that we've really been thinking about at Verisart as we start to open up fully to the public next year is how we do a better job in terms of the verification processes, because there are 2 issues with regards to any form of blockchain platform, which is in the art market there's often a demand to be an authority. In the case of in the next speaker, you know, they're very much an authority in what they do, but when you look at building tech platforms, those are often not authorities, and we see the kind of problems that those tech platforms have. You know, if you look at fake listings on eBay or fake news on Facebook. And at Verisart, we have to sort of navigate that path between wanting to build a tech platform that people can use, because we're unable to be an authority, nor would we want to position ourselves as an authority. But we can do a better job in providing a sense of how verified a record is. So it's neither, it's not it is or it isn't. It's who's making the claim. We can verify the user identity. What is being claimed, how many other people agree with that claim, that can also kind of be verified. So you can build a picture of a certificate that is made up of multiple timestamps, multiple contributors, and multiple files. And you can allow people to associate private records to a record's history and provenance. And so right now we have a very basic system that thinks of like the artists that can create certificates of authenticity and they verify themselves through the system, and then collectors that can just make certificates of record or of existence. Now this would have potentially very little value unless, of course, you knew who the collector was. And if you knew who the collector was, you would have an increase in the sense of trust with that collector in all likelihood. But the collector themselves, now they've got a digital record, can facilitate additional data points and trust into their own record. They can get the gallery to endorse it. They might get an inventory management platform where it's been made from to kind of reflect the fact that it's come out of art systems. It might be insured. And so this idea of increased trust through the extension of the number of timestamps and the amount of use a certificate has, I think allows people over time to build a clearer picture. The things that we're working on right now is the verification processes that we're going to make available. But we're also looking at new ways that you can actually identify the physical artwork with the digital certificate. And so one of the exciting things is using image recognition and the image hashes that can be stored on a detailed level for a work and through something called deterministic perceptual hashing. It's an area that's still in its infancy, but Ahmed El-Gamal, who's on our board, has recently been doing some tests about using image recognition to determine fake drawings based on how the computer recognizes all the different lines. And it can even determine whether or not it's an actual copy or an original based on the way the photograph and the lines are recorded on that photograph. So in terms of closing this gap between the physical and the digital, there are a whole host of solutions from, RFID tags and stickers and unique seals and reports and x-rays and pigment analysis and all the kind of things that you'll hear later. From our point of view, these are just additional evidentiary data points that can be attached to a record, and for some objects, will be required in order for people to trust that record. The other things that we are really interested in is, and I know this is something that journalists will be talking about later, but the distribution of artist rights via fractional ownership. These are some of the kind of applications that a blockchain infrastructure easily enables. And around that, of course, one can imagine new forms of economic models of ownership around an art, whether it's shared, leased, and also new communities of artist fans being able to aggregate more easily than before. I'm going to leave you with something to consider, which is a quote on blockchain technology from this book called The Scientist and the Forger by Jahan Regai. It came out earlier this year. And she writes, talking about how blockchain certificates might be useful for the art market. The certificate benefits collectors who virtualize their assets without having to reveal to all price and identity. Benefits artists who gain a free inventory management system, and galleries who are informed when an artwork changes owner. Such a system will enable users to verify a work's authenticity, condition, and provenance from their mobile phones before engaging in any online auction or sale. There is no doubt that in the very near future, blockchain technology will revolutionize the art world. And this last statement is indeed right back to the beginning. The narrative discourse that blockchain technology is, the blank canvas that businesses like us are continuing to explore in terms of what can be done with the technology, and you'll be the people to decide which side of that discourse you fall. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
Our next speaker is Nicholas Eastoe. He's the founder and chief scientist in art analysis and research. This is one of the leader companies in the technical investigation of works of art in order to determine their attribution and authentication. Nicholas will explain that despite the fact that blockchain has a great potential, it is very important that we have a bridge between the digital world and the physical world, and he is going to explain it to us how to achieve this. So I will leave the floor to him without further ado. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Robert. That was actually a very great introduction to my talk. I hope you remember the last slide that he had, and there was a book, and there was an image on the book. Please just remember it till a few slides into my presentation. There we go. I think I'm here to give maybe a counter-narrative. I mean, as you've just heard, I come from a background where we're looking at the physical nature of art. So it's very much about the object. And I've been in a number of blockchain meetings and discussions, and I usually sit there thinking about, but where's the art? Where is the object that the artist is creating? Because so often it is that concrete object. And what I really want to talk today about is that kind of relationship. Don't get me wrong in this. I'm going to say up front that I think blockchain is a fantastic idea. It has huge potential. But, I always tend to add the but at these points, is what are the other things that we're missing here? What do we need to know? Are we missing something in the equation? This first slide that I've put up, it's a famous photograph of the Malevich corner of what's known as the 010 exhibition, 1915-16 exhibition of Russian avant-garde art. All the famous names were there, Malevich in particular. And for art historians, it's a fun exercise to go through and say, yes, I know what that one is. It's now in X museum. And you can identify these, and many are well known. But it struck me thinking about this because we often come up with questions to do with Russian avant-garde art because it's a particularly tricky area that we can often help with. What would blockchain have done for the 010 exhibition? Could we have recorded each of these works on the blockchain so that we would now be confident? Because what actually happens is that today people bring paintings along and they say, it was in the 010 exhibition, here it is. And we then have to demonstrate that no, it's not actually the one that's illustrated here. If you work it out, all the black and white and shades of grey don't match the colours that are in your painting. Besides, the painting is in Museum of Modern Art or wherever it is. So it's a good kind of focus as an example. I think the other point here is that, as we'll be hearing shortly from a living, breathing artist here who is creating and who can vouch for his work and say, this is what I'm putting onto the blockchain. For something like 99+% of art, you don't have the artist around to say that. So what are you going to do for all of that? And it's a question that we have to address. And that is where some of the more traditional kinds of approaches, how do you say an artwork is by that artist, how do you authenticate it, how do you verify it, becomes important. It was always important, it remains important, but blockchain is here that it's offering both great potential for us, but also new challenges. And I think the new challenges for us are more to do with how we respond to the promise of blockchain. So as somebody who deals a lot with authenticity and attribution and verification, what does it make me think in terms of, can we achieve the same kinds of levels of trust, proof, security in what we do as is offered by that new technological solution? What are the technological solutions to authenticity? So, a digital solution. What is it that we can do to provide these kinds of new forms, new technologies, old paintings, new technologies? Part of it is about trust, and this is something that we've already heard mentioned by Robert, that essentially when you're putting things onto the blockchain, you are trying to determine a level of trust of the source of the information. So it can't be just anybody saying, I painted this, I'm going to put it on as my work, and I painted this Caravaggio. You've got to have very traditional kinds of forms of standard as to who created it and how you establish that, whether it's by new forms of analysis or it's by old forms of scholarship and knowing what the work is. But it can become difficult. But before we get to those points, let's just talk about that linkage between the physical object and the digital blockchain, because this is, for us, an important area that we need to be able to say that these records that we have relate to this specific physical object. So we have Munch's The Scream, we have a Caravaggio of Doubting Thomas. We need to be able to say that that object is the same as the blockchain record. Therefore you need this intermediate step of some sort of linkage between the two. So you have to have a verification link between physical world and digital world. And again, as Robert alluded to, there's been lots of different ways of doing this. In the past, it might have just been a photograph of the object and somebody wrote on the back of it. Today, there are far more sophisticated approaches, and there are many approaches. And to be honest, we're somewhat agnostic about these. We don't mind which particular technology one uses, as long as it's effective and it answers certain issues. For example, if you're going to stick something on your artwork, you want to be sure that it's not going to damage that artwork. So maybe you don't want to think about physical tags, though there are some very effective ones. There are also new technologies that take the artwork as its own barcode, in effect. It's using algorithms to identify features within the artwork that then become the mark that is used to define it. And it allows people to come back and revalidate the artwork. But I think what I'm most interested in here are these questions of how do you prove the artwork is what it is to go on the blockchain in the first place. This is from a piece of work we did. This is Joseph Alba's Homage to the Square, of this series, of which there are many, many, many versions. They are all basically either 3 or 4 inset squares of different colours. Forgers like them because they think they're easy to do. Surely I can paint 4 inset squares. And it was interesting, in this case we were working with the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation to look at some of these issues. Here we have a kind of prime example of artworks that would naturally go straight onto the blockchain. They belong to a foundation. They came from the artist's studio. They are fully verified in that way. But we were trying to look a little more deeply at this because they were also having artworks coming to them where people were asking, are these the genuine article? So we took an approach where rather than people, the connoisseurs, the art historians looking at the work and saying, yes, that looks like an Albers, we took an approach to try and deconstruct the artwork to make a more objective assessment of what makes that artwork. And in fact, we came up with about 50 or 60 different technical features, just from a simple painting like this, that we could define as measurable features of this artwork. And it's everything from whether he uses a brush or a palette knife, how he prepares the panels, what materials are used specifically, and on and on and on. So you've taken by this what was traditionally what a connoisseur would do, look at it, say yes, that is by the artist, sign off on it. You get to something that is more objectively measurable, something that is then closer to what you would perhaps want to include in new technologies and blockchain kinds of approaches. You've got something that doesn't require the one expert who's having an off day or is retired or there was never a good expert in the first place. You can start to construct these ways of looking at things in a more rigorous, systematic fashion. In fact, these other images are some of our technical images of these artworks, really just showing different things to do with everything from the surface texture to how it looks in an X-ray to looking at what drawing was done to prepare it and so on. Recognize it? This is another prime example of a painting that you would think goes straight onto the blockchain. It came from a collection that was already well established. That it had been collected by somebody in the 30s, hidden away, was now being sold off by a descendant progressively as a collection through auction. Until it came to this one. And basically doubts started to be expressed because there weren't all the paperwork to go with it. So lack of paperwork in this case. But it came to me for analysis. And we were able to show very simply, very straightforwardly, that there were materials in here which could not have been used by the artist at the date it was supposed to be created. And this is our case 0, our index case for what then became known as the Beltracchi forgery case. In fact, this was the first identified work from that group, from which he earned some tens of millions of euros across a very lengthy career. I think the point here is that what picked it out wasn't the art historian, because the connoisseur is really the most direct equivalent of your AI assessment of style. Even if AI can be made to perform better than some experts, they are still a certain sort of arbiter. We're taking a very different kind of perspective on these things and bringing a new kind of view to artworks and to establishing their authenticity. So we're looking at the materials, the material structure. It gives a different kind of perspective to what you derive from an AI-based solution. We use other technologies equally, but it gives you an idea that to get the most effective results in these kinds of cases, you're wanting to look at things from multiple perspectives. Another simple example, sort of taking this on from working with foundations and some of the problems that we're faced with in real life. This was a painting that came to us courtesy of the Kandinsky Committee, as it was thought to be a painting by Kandinsky of his wife Nina. And there'd been a lot of doubt over this painting, and I think it had gone to the committee, and actually they wanted to reject it. They didn't particularly like it. They thought there were all sorts of things wrong with it. So they sent it off to us as another opinion, hoping that we would come back and say, yeah, it can't possibly be. As we started to look, more and more of these problems actually started to unravel the other way. And we did some actually very simple things. In this case, we were looking through the painting and we could see that there were things underneath, and we were able to actually find that there was a drawing underneath. So we wrote our report, we said the canvas is okay, the materials are okay. We found this drawing. What we didn't know was that there was a little known drawing in Kandinsky's sketchbook that depicted exactly the scene. And so the committee was able to reverse their position, and they basically, it's now in the catalogue raisonné for the artist. This, in the present discussion, raises a number of issues. I mean, one is the kind of the malleability of attribution, so that it might have gone into the catalogue originally as a doubtful work. It then becomes something different. You need to be able to incorporate into these systems ways of changing position. Another thing to raise with this is that the Kandinsky Committee no longer exists. It came to its natural end. So who then becomes the authority on this artist? And there's essentially these committees and foundations. Some have a long lifetime, but others are strictly limited. But you're also dependent on individual art historians who may have only a career and then stop, or they get worried about being sued for their opinions and stop. So how do you provide this kind of function in the system? And this is kind of, again, a real practical need within the field, that we need more stable, reliable, objective assessments to feed into these kinds of blockchain solutions. Just as a last one to wrap up, and also to bring it right round full circle back to the Russian avant-garde. This is another project that's a nice illustration of how we can go forward in our area of providing solid knowledge and advice. This is Larionov and Goncharova, who have for a long time been known as problem artists, basically because they were so heavily forged. In particular, a couple of catalogues raisonné came out for Goncharova that on one of them, possibly both, the cover illustration was actually a fake. And clearly it presented difficulties if you're going to establish something reliable to go into the blockchain. You would always think that a catalogue raisonné is well researched, it's got all the most up-to-date and accurate information, and therefore it's the natural kind of thing to add in and prove validity of the artwork. In this case, what we were able to do through a sort of joint cooperation with a funding body, a major museum that had major holdings of Larionov and Goncharova, and ourselves as sort of technical specialists, analytical specialists, we were able to look at a large group of these works, a bit like the Joseph Albers paintings, but to set a baseline so that we could start to say, works by these artists should have these characteristics. So again, we're starting to build new ways of providing these sort of secure foundations to things that have been traditionally done by other means and perhaps being found wanting. And there we have Laranov and Goncharova in older age, with photograph so that you can see that this particular artwork is alongside his artist. Thank you very much.
Okay. Jonas Lund.
Jonas Lund is our last speaker today. He's a Swedish artist who lives in Berlin and who uses blockchain in his artistic practice. Jonas just created shares through blockchain. Those are called Jonas Lund tokens, and the owners of such tokens can actually vote about his artistic decisions. That is to say that the shareholders have an impact on his art and they are involved in the decisions he makes about his artworks. So welcome, Jonas, and please take the stage. Thank you.
Well, here. Hi, I'm Jonas Lund. Thanks so much for coming and thanks so much for inviting me. I have 64 slides in this presentation for 20 minutes, so it's 20 seconds per slide. The talk is called Smart Contracts. In my work, I like to make... Basically, I'm exploring a couple of different topics, but mostly focusing in on different types of power structures, networked power structures of hierarchical power, basically. I'm trying to accumulate more power for myself, in some sense. And I think one particular network I've been looking into quite a lot is the art world network. It's a sort of isolated, extremely hierarchical, distributed sense of power, meaning that like the top 200 people influence the vast majority of people's fates in this world. You know? So how can I use this as material to make work, and how can I try and subvert value creation within the art world network? So this is from 2014. It's an exhibition painting series called Flip City. Back in the height of the flip collecting art market scene in LA, New York, London, with led by Stefan Simkovic primarily. I was invited to do an exhibition in LA, which was the sort of central city to this, between a couple of different dealers and gallerists. So I decided to make a painting series of 40 paintings, all based on process-based abstraction, or maybe zombie formalism in some sense, and then outfit these paintings with GPS tracker on the stretcher bar. So I could track them as they were moving around in the network, being sold and resold and like injected into this collector base of intense hype and manipulation to try and glean some type of mechanism or something like this. The terms of ownerships are stamped on the back, so it's kind of, you cannot dispute them and you can't remove them. It becomes important later. The GPS tracking device has a SIM card. It sends a message to my server with its own location, which is all publicly available on the website flipcity.net, where you can also get a location history, so you can see where it moves around in the world. As a way for me to kind of reclaim the knowledge, you know, in the most opaque power system in the world, which is the art world and the art market. How can I reclaim some power for myself to increase my own position in a way? Yeah, I think of them as Trojan horses in a way, like injecting it in, entering and ending up either in like a free port in a basement or in a collector's living room, giving me the information as to where it is. You know? And then in the end it ends up in auction, and then again, as we notice, the circle is closed, it goes back into auction with the terms of ownership attached in the catalog. So. 1 year later, similarly, I've come to realize that this relationship between artist-gallerist is a bit problematic, let's say. Let's say the gallerist maybe doesn't always have my best interests in mind, but possibly his interests in mind. So I made a painting series with terms of sales hand-painted on the front of the canvas, determining what needs to happen in the event of a sale or what needs to happen after it's been sold. And the certification, let's say the authentication, is governed through a website, it's stringsattached.info, which is the authority that determines whether it's a valid work of art or not. Should the terms not be honored, the certificate is void, and then it's no longer a work of mine. This particular painting is actually in auction today in like about 2 hours in Philip's Contemporary Day Sale in New York. Should you be interested in bidding, just to increase the price, it will make me happy. Lot 431. Another one, this painting may only be sold to one of the following collectors: Anita Sabludovic, Simon Dupuy, Beth Rudy de Woody, or Alain Servais. So controlling who gets to own my work or not. This painting may only be purchased by a collector who agrees to purchase 2 more works by the artist before March 21, 2017. Very common strategy employed by gallerists. You know, you may buy this painting only if you buy this video piece first. You know, it's just very common. It's a classic combination. This painting may only be purchased by a collector who also agrees to purchase donation, which is this one. This painting may only be purchased by a collector who will donate it to one of the following museums by March 21, 2020. Moderna Museum, Tate, Hamburg Bahnhoflackmas Stedelijk Museum. This painting may only be sold to a Golden Globe winner. And this painting may only be sold once every other work in this series has been sold. So it's a way for me to reclaim the power, right? Like, obviously it's by the generosity of the gallerist to play along. In this case, it's Steve Turner. I give him like a hard time because he has to place these works and try it. But again, like, subvert power structure, reclaim it for myself, rewrite the rules, let's say. Like, create a smart contract, you know, like to be, okay, so I'm the authority of my own sort of universe in a way. And I can explore or think about how value is produced and created within this like highly bizarre network, which is the art world, founded in subjectivity of unknown causes. So, and here it's like another exhibition called Your Logo Here, which is similarly using trades with different institutions and museums and art fairs. In exchange for placing their logo on the painting, they've given me something, such as an exhibition or a feature or a full-page ad or attention, basically. So trading, rather than just placing works in collections, trading for something else. But so we're here to talk about the blockchain, and so here's that was the background, and now it's like the current presence, and I have 13 minutes left, so it's okay. So the Jonas Lund token. So we have a Bitcoin, positively minded Bitcoin presentation, skeptical minded Bitcoin presentation, and now we have like I totally don't believe in the blockchain and Bitcoin at all. I find it quite. Like just the Bitcoin protocol itself currently consumes like the same amount of energy as Denmark. It's completely ridiculous. The proof of work algorithm, which is like this sort of authenticates or verifies the Bitcoin protocol, is completely wasteful. So basically, it wastes so much energy to solve math problems, to have an immutable ledger, which is solving a kind of non-problem. Let's say it like this. There's other implementations of the blockchain as a concept, which has some validity, I think. So I'm not 100% skeptic, I'm just slightly skeptical. So in this case, because I've also made a work in using the Ethereum blockchain, which is what comes after Bitcoin. On the Ethereum blockchain, you can deploy smart contracts, which is sort of token/currency that can be programmed with more rules. Let's say Bitcoin is a fixed protocol, it can't be changed, the Bitcoin is the Bitcoin. The Ethereum allows you to program different types of organizations and structures for voting, for producing tokens, minting your own currency, whatever. And in this case, the Jonas Lund token is my own currency, or it functions as shares in my artistic practice. It's become a shareholder with agency over future decisions concerning Jonas Lund's artistic practice. There's a fixed amount of 100,000 tokens, and they're being distributed in a couple of different phases. But what this means, the agency over future decisions, means that each share, each token is a voting share in my practice. So every strategic decision that needs to be made, if you have a token, you get to vote on it. And one token equals one vote. So it's a way for me to incentivize participation, incentivize reaching a strategic decision for what will be the most optimal choice in any given scenario. Because if you have a token, the value of this token will increase if my career performs better. That's the assumption, right? So when my career goes, like I get a solo show at MoMA or I get a solo show somewhere else, the value of the token becomes more desirable. It's supply and demand. The supply is fixed, so the demand can increase, and then that allows you, the holder, to sell it on an open crypto market. So every blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto talk you'll ever go to will have one of these graphs that will try and explain what's going on. So this is the Jonas Lund token graph. It consists of four different parts. So you have the holders and the currency. So it functions as a currency because it's a representation of a value, like an abstracted representation of value. The currency as a current in the sea, I think is the nicest way of thinking about currency. And you have holders, which are the shareholders, which currently there's like 50 different shareholders. So it's like distributed. There's next to this is the voting and the proposals, which currently are only submitted by me. So I submit a proposal to the board and they get to vote on it. Once you hold more than 1,000 tokens, you can also submit proposals to this board. And then it becomes more sort of automated. And it's an ERC20 token, which is a token standard, which is sort of acceptable most places. There's some new, better, faster standards currently on Ethereum. Like there are fungible tokens, but currently the ERC20 token makes sense. And all of this leads to art production, basically. So this is the graph of the decentralized autonomous artistic practice. Decentralization because there is no center, supposedly. And autonomous because it will be automatic. As in, I don't have to do anything anymore, you know. Like I can go to Ibiza and have some vacation, and then my board can continue to produce work. The token holders can make proposals, and I can just like write some emails, and that should be it. It comes with the terms of ownership, which determines all the different distribution phases. In the, don't have to go into it too much currently. There's 5,000 tokens reserved for the Jonas Lund Token Bounty Program. And so basically, the tokens are distributed in 3 different phases. The first phase, they're available by acquiring a wall-based artwork, which is these type of things. Each artwork has X amount of tokens attached to it. So you can see, if we go forward, here you can see this one is Jonas Lund token piece that has 1,711 tokens attached to it. So if the collector buys the work, he gets 1,711 tokens. And then that also determines the price in this case. In the first phase, the price is directly linked to the Ethereum, the price of Ethereum, and 100th of this. So 100th of an Ethereum times the number, and you get the price of the artwork. So it's like a volatile pricing scheme, because when the show, this was from a show in New York in March, it opened, the price of one token was like $8, and as it opened, the price of Ethereum went like this. And then at the closing of the show, the price of the token was like $3. So it allows you to speculate, right? So you can hold value or sell value. It also has the wallet, which is it's like the public key, which is assigned to the token, assigned to the piece. It comes in different shapes. The shapes are somewhat inspired by corporate financial institutions, mostly. In different shapes and colors. So that's the phase number 1. Phase number 2 is that they are becoming distributed through initially what was thought of as an ICO, which is the crypto talk for an IPO, which is like an initial public offering or an initial coin offering, where half of the tokens, 50,000, are reserved for that. I have since dropped the idea of an ICO because ICO became synonymous with scam from last year because there were so many ICOs and for all questionable ideas. So this crowd sale will now happen at localized events where I'm present, but then it's available to purchase for anyone. Once you have tokens, you get into this interface, which is the background interface of the proposals and the votes and the voting, where you can see this is somehow some recent ones, the Sheikah Pavilion Proof of Work, which is this big cryptocurrency exhibition in Berlin, curated by Simon Denny, who made a lot of crypto, Bitcoin-related work since 2015. The board gets to decide what work goes into the show. So here's like option number 1, a plain CNC'd and engraved plywood piece. Or option number 2, which is kind of a painted version of this. Or option number 3, a more didactic version that actually explains what it is. And you can see the votes to the right. So you have, for example, Christian Paul, who's the curator digital at the Whitney Museum. She says, I like folding the description of the token's function into the object itself. It makes the token a token. So it's a sort of ongoing conversation between all the token holders as to what's the most strategic decision. And then in the end, we have a winner, which is option number 3, with my sort of update. Which says like, okay, it makes sense that the token is a token. It's a representation of its own value. It can become the didactic version for the show to gather more attention for the work. And then, so that's the winner of the piece, basically. Which in this example hadn't been made once the vote was done. So I had to produce it very last minute because the deadlines and stuff didn't necessarily work. So then it looks like this in the show. It's very bad documentation. It's just from my iPhone. But that's the basement of the Sheikah Pavilion. It's a former kind of, not very nice. Then there's a token bounty program, which functions where you can do certain things in exchange for tokens. So if you would host a Jonas Lund solo exhibition at an institution, you can get between 10 and 2,000 tokens. Or if you like pick a critic's pick of a Jonas Lund show, you can get 50 tokens. Or if you invite Jonas Lund to give a talk, you can get between 1 and 200 tokens. So this like rewards can also be distributed. And here's a guy who tries to claim 2,000 tokens for a solo show in Bergen. And then the board has to decide, okay, should I accept this invitation for 2,000 tokens or should we renegotiate for a new proposal? And then the democracy rules in this case of all the votes, so we have to renegotiate for fewer Jonas Lund tokens, and then maybe we can do the show in exchange for some tokens. So then we go back, I renegotiate, we have a new proposal. So after discussing with this guy who invited me, we came to the conclusion that we have to give it to the board to decide how many tokens it's worth. The options were like decline the participation, participate for 500, 1,000 or 1,500 tokens. Because we got some more information about the space and it looks like a perfectly nice white cube, so that's like that's okay, you know. And I think in fact some of the comments is like, this is very white cube, do it. Obviously the white cube needs you. Yeah, so participate for 500 tokens. I completely agree with Christian Paul. She points out that artists should never pay for exhibitions, which I 100% agree with. Never pay for participation. But I think it's not a paying, I don't pay for the exhibition, it's an exchange. So it's a favor for a favor, you know, like the classics, I scratch your back, you scratch my back. So it's okay. And then they agree, so that show will happen. That show will happen next year in April, I think, or May. Because they also agreed to pay for the production of the work, which is then like, it's like an incentivized sort of production. This is a sneak preview, which is top secret, which is for tomorrow at Art Düsseldorf, which is wallpaper. So it's an empty booth, and the only thing that's available for sale is the actual token. And you have like the classic shareholder wall, where everybody who has a token is listed, and you have the kind of the fox representing really wants to buy some Jonas Lund tokens. The fox is there for a very particular reason. It's a very famous Linus Torvalds quote, the guy who wrote the Linux kernel, is that as a no pictures, top secret, yeah. Is that you have to be lazy as a fox, meaning you have to be smart, you know, like sneaky. So you can find it's like the classic writing the Linux kernel, which powers 90% of all computers, which drives, so you have to find the clever solution, to play your cards right, to find the sneakiest solution. So it's not lazy as complacency, it's lazy as a strategy. You know? So the fox represents this. And then at the very corner, you have the fine print of the terms of ownership, which is important. But then in the end, when you buy a token, you get a certificate that looks like this. Because even if it's a, you know, it's something which exists on the blockchain, but then to buy something, you would like to take something with you home. And this gets authenticated by a stamp and an emboss and a signature, and this includes, if you don't have a Ethereum wallet, you get one generated for you with a private and a public key. The QR code in the lower right is the private key, so you can scan it and get a token. And yeah, I think that's it. I think the time is perfect. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Jonas.
And holders vote on whether you should attend today.
No, they didn't, because something I forgot to mention. I still have majority share. So
Okay.
all the proposals so far is more like suggestions or input.
Okay.
But it's very much my intention to remove this majority share holding. Because as soon as it's removed, it becomes more autonomous. You know?
Yeah.
Like I become somehow less of a thing. But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Así que muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you, Robert, Nicholas, and Jonas, for sharing their experience with us and for introducing a topic that can be very technical and complex. We wanted to open the debate to the audience right now, but we have very few minutes. We have about 15 minutes, and I would like to invite our speakers again onto the stage so that they can answer your questions.
Okay. Así que creo que tenemos micrófono.
I think we have some mics. Anybody has a question for our speakers today?
Okay, let's see if my Spanish is good.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, all of you, for your presentations. My name is Isabel Ariza. I'm a lawyer, and I'm very interested in smart contracts and art. Would like to ask you if you think that there would be a main currency, cryptocurrency, in the art market, or do you think, for example, that it will be more boutique cryptocurrencies or customized cryptocurrencies that will lead to the art market? Thank you.
I don't know whether, Robert, you want to answer that one?
You're the experts.
So just so I understand, the question is whether there will be specific cryptocurrencies for the purchase of art?
Yeah, for example, within the Ethereum system, or do you think there will be like more boutique cryptocurrencies or multi-cryptocurrencies within the art market? Yes.
I mean, I think there's a number of ways that you can look at it. So the first is there are companies that have issued their own coin. So there's Visítanos that has actually a coin called Art, and there's also Codex that has a coin called Biddable. And, you know, they are looking for people to effectively purchase their coins in order to facilitate transactions. But the question is, like, why do you need to do that? Because, you know, Bitcoin is a very simple way to purchase art. You don't need to necessarily buy a specific company coin to make a transaction. But in the case of using a token that might be specifically to support community participation or fractional ownership in a future artist's rights that might be associated to the work, there I think it's more interesting. But those tokens are really conforming to one or two standards right now on Ethereum, like in the case of Jonas and ERC20, or on other people are using non-fungible tokens like ERC 721. So I personally don't see a significant use case for companies forcing people to buy their own coin in order to participate in the general transaction of artworks. But I do see interesting possible use cases for specific groups that might come together in order to engage in an art project or in an art participation. So jury's out, but you know, Jonas probably is a leader in that field.
I think in general, there's been some cases where artwork's been sold for Bitcoin. I think MAC in Vienna, the Contemporary Museum there, bought some screensavers through a online gallery called Coin Temporary, but it's a novelty. You know, it's just to show that you can. I think when it comes to buying and selling work, there's like dollars, euros, pound, and yen. I think, or maybe yuan. That's it, no? And because it's too, like cryptocurrency as a sort of anything beyond speculation, it's too volatile. You know, it just moves so fast. And the transaction costs and speed of Ethereum and Bitcoin is too slow for it to make sense, I think. But yeah, for sure, there's other incentives. Like a friend of mine is starting a decentralized autonomous Kunstverein, which is a German model for running like a supportive art space, where traditionally it's in the village, where if you live in the village, you pay a membership fee and you get things in return. So they're using their own token for this, which is more like localized for smaller things. There's a lot of applications, but for bigger things, I don't also necessarily see any kind of point in it, unless it's very, very shady. I mean, yeah, because it's, you know, that's the largest point. Like most things that's been bought and sold with Bitcoin is illegal things, you know, traditionally, I think. So.
There's an online auction house which is just launched called Portion, and all of the transactions via that auction house, you can only use cryptocurrency to transact in the works on that platform.
Thank you.
Tax.
Sí, hay una pregunta, sí.
Hello, thank you all of you for your presentation. It has been a pleasure to listen to your presentation, and I would like to know if you think that the use of the blockchains is kind of reserved to the contemporary art, where the artists are still alive and can certify their own work, or also to a kind of art market exclusively thinking about online transactions. I mean, I think that galleries and some kind of trade models still keep that old tradition of giving a certificate on paper, and are not willing to adapt to this new kind of technological language that is quite hard to get into it. So I would like to know what's your impression and your perspective about this. Thank you.
Nicholas, do you want to answer that one?
I'll pick that one up. I think it's very early stages, but there's going to be quite radical change coming. At the moment, if you look at everything from the people who are selling tagging technologies through to blockchain, they're all very aware of the authenticity issue. And the simple resolution is to go to people like Jonas and say, give me artworks that I can have pre-verified. But as I say, there's this statistic that probably more than 99% of art is, you can't do that with. You have to have a verification step. Therefore, you've got to have a process. And we're certainly seeing that we're sitting there as authentication experts. Increasingly, companies who are developing these kinds of technologies are coming to us as potential providers for that step in things. So I think it's probably going to be effectively forced on the market that they will have to participate in these things. As the market itself develops, becomes more aware of online trading, smart contracts, whatever, you have to have the equivalent standards of verification to go with it for all the other art you have. And that means you've got to embrace these new approaches. You might get away with the old standard. If somebody signs a piece of paper, what do you do with it? You scan it and put it on the blockchain. Still doesn't prove what you need to prove. You need to improve the quality of the information coming from our end going onto the blockchain.
Robert, do you want to add something there? I mean, just to speak about, whether blockchain is more suited to transactions in the primary market rather than the secondary market.
Well, it's certainly our focus. We're focused on the contemporary art market primarily. The other thing to bear in mind is the notion of the art market very much depends upon who you ask. And, here we perhaps are thinking more about works that sell in auction or through galleries. But there's also a huge amount of limited edition photography that's just sold online. So one of the new things that we're launching at the end of this month, beginning next month, is an app on Shopify. So if you're a photographer and you have a store on Shopify and you want to add blockchain certification to your cart and you're selling your own prints, you now have a pretty neat way of being able to add unique certification. And what's interesting about using the blockchain is that there is something called the anti-double spend provision, which prevents me sending you a Bitcoin and then the next person the same Bitcoin. And that's very much relevant with regards to certification. So once you know that there is unique certification out there, I think you can move forward with significantly more trust and hopefully more liquidity. And if you look at the contemporary art market, while Nicholas is right, there's 99% of artworks out there. Perhaps the artists are unable to be around to say that this was their works. But the growth in the art market is contemporary, in terms of the sort of lion's share of transactions. And I think one of the reasons for that is that people want the artwork of our time, but they also want less concern about disputed provenance. And so I think that the more we can encourage artists to make the best certification standards they can today with what we believe are the best tools to do that, I think it sets the art market up for a brighter future.
¿Otras preguntas?
Hi, hello everyone. My question is for Jonas. How do you actually manage to manage your community? Did you build a software in order to do that, or did you use I don't know. I don't know how does it works actually.
So there's the main space for the token is the jlt.ltd website. And you interface with it through MetaMask, which is a sort of browser extension that allows you to log in with your Ethereum account and be authenticated on the website. So when you vote, it goes through there. So it's like I made that website, as the sort of main platform for how it's managed, like the authority, let's say, of that. And that's it. And then there's more, I think of the Jonas Lund token as a sort of self-created, one-man corporation, so at the end of the year there will be a shareholder letter talking about the year that has progressed and what's to look forward to into the future for future investments and stuff like this. So that's it, but there's a lot, it's still very new. Let's say, like the token launched in end of March this year. And so there's a lot of different avenues in terms of how to manage the community, whereas more of a Patreon model where you also give insights into secrets, like direct input into direct views into the studio, into the idea making process, and how much that can be sort of subverted and manipulated. But I think that's all to come. I think the first step is just to distribute as much as possible to kind of create the owner base, let's say, that wants to be active and participate within in the distributed, decentralized, autonomous artistic practice. So we'll see. But it's.
Thank you.
Okay, buenas noches.
Good afternoon. I have a question for our first speaker. Your blockchain network, is it private? Is it private?
So we publish to a public ledger.
¿Cuántos nodos tiene?
Sorry, say.
How many nodes?
Directly to the world's most widely used distributed ledger. So we're not running our own private blockchain.
que registráis en Ethereum.
So, do you register in the Ethereum network?
A protocol called Open Timestamps, which one of our board advisors created, a guy called Peter Todd, who's a Bitcoin core developer. And we're using Open Timestamps to hash our data and record that on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Do you have a custody server for the expert records connected to each log?
A verification proxy server to enable people to associate secure records to the certificate in the next year. Currently we allow the user to fully archive the data that they've hashed. It's something called a Baget file. So we enable the user to fully own the data that they share with us and to maintain that themselves as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Can I just ask you a question, Jonas, if you don't mind? Sure. How are artists reacting generally to the advent of blockchain technology? I mean, you spoke a lot about reclaiming the power. And is that the way they see it? That are they using it to authenticate their work, or how do they see it?
Like my friends and peers, I only know one person who was like engaging actively with the authentication on the blockchain through a Berlin-based startup which was called The Scribe, which no longer operates anymore on the same process. He also started a online gallery called Left Gallery, where he would authenticate artworks, like selling digital works basically, which I completely disagreed with, because he produced artificial scarcity of digital items, which is fundamentally against my whole principle and beliefs of digital content, that it should be like, you know, accessible and copied left and right. I think the sort of hype that surrounds the crypto scene, especially in Berlin, there's a lot of people. You go and see that proof of work show by Simon Denny with just like 25 artists. The majority, or like not the majority, but like 40% are based in or around Berlin. So there's somehow a scene. I think there's a couple of different things. There's a potential to rethink systems of traditionally established power structures and hierarchies. I know Matt Dryhurst, who works together with Holly Herndon, they've been rethinking the distribution of music and how music support can function. And like Nick Copenhagen, who was one of the original workers for the original DAO on Ethereum, which was the first decentralized autonomous organization. He was working on this distributed Kunstverein, like rethinking these models. I think that's interesting because you can rewrite the rules in a certain way. But I think the reason why it gets so much attention is because it's just like a gold rush. You see, like, if I would have bought Bitcoin in 2012, I would be like a multimillionaire right now. So it's a way to hook on to the sort of most contemporary rush of like potential to make tons of money. So it's sort of owning, like going in tune with the market. But I'm typically slightly cynically minded in my thinking also, so you can see it from both sides, you know. It's potential for new ways of governance, new ways of new different models of voting, of consensus, of democracy, of thinking of liquid democracy, thinking of Ethereum as a global voting platform, because global warming is a global problem, so it should be voted on a global scale and not like based on the quickly dying notion of sovereign states, which in 2040, when we have 1 billion refugees because of global warming, it's gonna like not really work, you know? So then maybe Ethereum is the platform. Maybe not, maybe it's just the early ways, but there's something really magical in the conceptual position of a distributed, decentralized public authority. It's just that it cannot be shut down on the kind of principle, which is very exciting. I just don't know if any of the applications are there yet. You know? And I really don't think Bitcoin is the thing, because the Bitcoin blockchain is just a waste of energy. But it's the one that starts the whole process, I think. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of potential, I think. And for sure, I mean, it's early days. Bitcoin is like in the the vernacular since 2010, something like that.
I was reading, there's a report which is just published by Oxford University and the Alan Turing Institute, and it's actually worth reading. It's available on the internet. It's called Art Market 2.0, and in this report they say that in relation to blockchain technology, we are where the internet was in 1993. So before the advent of Facebook and .com boom, and so it's very much we're at the very beginning. It's a nascent state of development.
Yeah, for sure. It's very, very early days. And imagine if you would give all the script kiddies at home access to a Wall Street market. What's going to happen? Completely unregulated, no rules. What do you? It's just mayhem. It's mayhem. To establish the structures. So.
Robert, Nicholas, where do you think the future lies? I mean, with this technology, have you?
I think we're at a very early but very exciting stage, and that it's actually difficult to predict just where it's going to go. There's clearly a huge amount of potential. I mean, listening to talks like this, the other kind of comment is, back in the 1990s, what was the internet? And in a way, it's going to move from not quite understanding what it's about. We think it has huge potential. A lot of concern with the mechanics of it. How does it function? How do you build one? These kinds of things. Through to something that you just use. I also think there's a need to differentiate, the rails on which the train runs and what's in the train. That there's going to come a point where we're just using these things as a matter of course. What's key is what we're going to put into them.
Yeah, Robert.
Well, I mean, the challenge we have is that we're talking about a technology and fundamentally a protocol. It's often referred to as the basis for the Internet of Value. We've seen the Internet of Information, the Internet of Communication, and we now have this emerging Internet of Value, which is one of the things that you'll hear blockchain proponents talk about. But an analogy that I like, rather than thinking about what year are we in the 90s, is look at something called SMTP. We don't need to know what it is. That's how our emails get to us. And that technology came out in the sort of early 80s, and it wasn't until really AOL, through the You've Got Mail ads, and I worked for AOL in 95 to 97, and I saw, people just went online in order to send email. So we're kind of waiting for killer applications beyond the facilitation of a virtual currency, such as Bitcoin, which does and has proven to have an attractive kind of following. But, companies like ours, in terms of what we're trying to do for people in the art market to build better digital certification standards, and there will be many other companies that will bring to market services that just wouldn't have been as easily created before. And I think on the back of that, if we can think about interoperability between different blockchains out there, we can then really start to build this connected Internet of Value, which I think will foster really interesting applications.
Okay, yo creo que estamos
I think we are out of time, but thank you everyone for being here, for your questions and for your participation, and I hope that you found the discussion very interesting, and we are very grateful to our speakers for having come here to share their experiences with us. And please do not forget that this is not over. We are talking about blockchain, we're talking about connections, and we have right now time for the networking. We have time to chat and to keep talking and participating. We are going to have refreshment in the room next to this one. So thank you all for coming here today, and I hope that you participate in the coming events. Thank you very much.